The crisp autumn morning air carried whispers of change as Marcus Johnson stood at the imposing gates of Oak Ridge Academy. His worn backpack felt heavier than usual, weighing down his shoulders as he took in the sprawling campus with its manicured lawns and colonial architecture. The moment he stepped through those wrought iron gates, his life would forever be divided into before and after. He could still turn around, go back to the comfort of his old school where nobody looked at him like he didn't belong. But his mother's words from this morning echoed in his mind. Remember who you are, Marcus. Remember where you come from. That's your strength, not your shame. With a deep breath that filled his lungs with the scent of freshly cut grass and privilege, Marcus took his first step into Oak Ridge Academy, unaware that the ripples of his quiet presence would soon become waves that would change an entire community. The crowded hallway parted like the Red Sea as he walked through. Conversations hushed, eyes followed, and whispers trailed behind him. Marcus kept his gaze forward, his face a carefully composed mask hiding the anxiety churning in his stomach. The worn edges of his second-hand uniform contrasted sharply with the crisp, tailored versions worn by his new classmates. His shoes, polished to a shine by his own hands at 5 in the morning, couldn't hide their age. The first bell rang, sending students scurrying to their classrooms. Marcus checked his schedule again. Advanced U.S. History with Dr. Peterson, room 203. He found the classroom and hesitated at the doorway, scanning for an empty seat. The only one available was in the front row, directly in front of the teacher's desk. Of course it would be. As the second bell rang, Marcus slid into the seat, keeping his eyes down as he arranged his notebooks neatly on the desk. He could feel the stares burning into his back, hear the hushed giggles and whispers. "Good morning, class," Dr. Peterson's voice cut through the murmurs. "We have a new student joining us today. Mr. Johnson, would you like to introduce yourself?" Marcus stood, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. The silence that followed was deafening as 30 pairs of eyes locked onto him. "I'm Marcus Johnson," he said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "I just transferred from Westside High." A snicker from the back of the room. "Isn't that in the projects?" someone stage whispered. Dr. Peterson's eyebrows furrowed. "That's enough, Mr. Blake. Please continue, Marcus." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'm here on an academic scholarship," he added, hoping it would somehow legitimize his presence. Another voice, lower this time. Affirmative action at its finest. More snickers. Marcus sat down, his face burning but his expression unchanged. He opened his notebook and focused on the date he wrote at the top of the page. The neat numbers a small comfort in the sea of hostility. If you're feeling the tension of this moment, the discomfort of walking into a space where you're immediately judged, take a second to subscribe for more stories that explore the courage it takes to stand your ground in hostile environments. Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Today we're continuing our discussion on post-Civil War reconstruction. Can anyone remind us where we left off?" Hands shot up around the room, but Marcus kept his down, despite knowing the answer. He'd spent the weekend reading ahead, determined to be prepared. But now, sitting here, he realized that no amount of preparation could have readied him for this. The class dragged on, with Marcus taking meticulous notes while trying to ignore the occasional paper ball that hit the back of his head. When the bell finally rang, he gathered his things quickly, hoping to make a swift exit. "Mr. Johnson," Dr. Peterson called as the other students filed out. "A moment, please." Marcus approached the desk, bracing himself for whatever was coming. "I read your transfer file," Dr. Peterson said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your essay on the socio-economic impacts of Reconstruction was quite impressive. I'm looking forward to seeing your contributions to our class discussions." Marcus nodded, surprised. "Thank you, sir. Don't let them intimidate you," Dr. Peterson added quietly. "This place, it can be challenging for newcomers, especially those who—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "Those who don't belong," Marcus finished for him. Dr. Peterson's eyes softened. "Those who challenge the status quo by their mere presence," he corrected. "History is made by those brave enough to step where they're told they shouldn't, Mr. Johnson. Remember that." As Marcus navigated the crowded hallway to his next class, the words settled into his chest, a small flame of determination kindling beneath his ribs. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you didn't belong? What did you do in that moment? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to persevere. Lunch period arrived like a sentence. Marcus stood at the entrance of the cafeteria, his tray clutched tightly in his hands as he surveyed the sea of tables. Each one seemed to have an invisible force field around it, with students clustered in tight groups that clearly had no room for outsiders. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation and laughter, the smell of mediocre pizza and privilege filling the air. Marcus spotted an empty table near the back and made his way toward it, keeping his eyes forward to avoid the stares that followed him. He had almost reached it when a foot extended into his path. His tray clattered to the floor, splattering spaghetti across the polished linoleum and his carefully pressed uniform pants. The cafeteria fell silent for a moment before erupting into laughter. Marcus stood perfectly still, looking down at the mess, his face burning but his expression unmoved. "Oops," said a voice dripping with fake concern. "Guess you should watch where you're going, scholarship." Marcus looked up to see a tall boy with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. Connor Blake, the same voice from history class. "You got sauce on my shoes," Connor continued, his voice loud enough to ensure everyone could hear. "These cost more than your whole wardrobe, I bet." Marcus bent down and began collecting the scattered food onto his tray. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" Connor pressed. "Or do they not teach you manners in the projects?" Marcus stood, tray in hand, and looked Connor directly in the eyes. "They taught me not to waste my words on people who won't hear them," he said quietly, his voice steady. Then he turned and walked toward the trash cans, his back straight despite the sauce staining his pants and the laughter that followed him. As he was scraping the ruined lunch into the garbage, a woman in a cafeteria uniform approached him. "Here, honey," she said, handing him a damp cloth. "For your pants." Marcus accepted it gratefully. "Thank you, Mom. I'm Mrs. Rivera," she said, her dark eyes kind but knowing. "Come with me. I've got some extra lunch in the back." Marcus followed her through the swinging doors into the kitchen, the noise of the cafeteria fading behind them. The kitchen was warm and smelled of bread and spices, a stark contrast to the sterile cafeteria beyond. Mrs. Rivera gestured to a small table in the corner. "Sit. Eat. Those vultures out there can wait for their seconds." She placed a plate of spaghetti in front of him, the portion larger and looking far more appetizing than what had been served in the line. Marcus hesitated. "I don't want to get you in trouble, Mrs. Rivera." She waved dismissively. "Please. I've been here 23 years. I know which rules matter and which ones don't." She sat across from him. "I saw what happened out there. That Blake boy has been a thorn in everyone's side since kindergarten." Marcus twirled the spaghetti around his fork. "It's fine. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," Mrs. Rivera said firmly. "I grew up in West Side too, you know, before they called it the projects. Back when it was just a neighborhood where people looked out for each other." Marcus looked up, surprised. "You lived in West Side?" She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Mulberry Street. My parents came from Puerto Rico in the 60s. Worked themselves to the bone so I could have opportunities." She studied him. "Just like someone's doing for you, I imagine." Marcus thought of his mother, working double shifts as a nurse's aide to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads after his father died. Of his brother Dion, who had given up a basketball scholarship to start working when their father passed, making sure Marcus could focus on his studies instead of getting a job. "Yeah," he said softly. "Just like that." Mrs. Rivera's eyes softened. "Then you honor them by being here, by not letting those kids out there define who you are." She paused. "You know, I sit on the school's Cultural Diversity Committee. It's mostly for show, to be honest, but we're planning the annual cultural fair next month. Maybe you'd have some ideas to contribute." Marcus considered this as he ate. A plan began to form in his mind, not just to survive Oak Ridge, but to make his presence mean something. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think I might." For the rest of lunch, they talked about West Side, the good and the bad, the challenges and the tight-knit community that made it special. By the time the bell rang, Marcus had not only eaten his fill but had gained something far more valuable, an ally. As he walked to his afternoon classes, the stained pants no longer seemed so important. The snickers and stares still followed him, but they didn't penetrate quite as deeply. A seed had been planted. A quiet revolution had begun. If this story of quiet dignity in the face of humiliation resonates with you, please subscribe for more narratives that explore the strength found in our roots and the power of staying true to who you are, even when the world tries to make you ashamed of it. The next few days settled into an uncomfortable routine. Marcus would arrive early, spend his day being either ignored or openly mocked, eat lunch with Mrs. Rivera in the kitchen, and stay late to study in the library until Deon could pick him up after his shift. He kept his head down, focused on his schoolwork, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. By Friday, the novelty of his presence had somewhat worn off. The taunts became more sporadic, though no less cutting when they came. In English class, Ms. Winters had assigned group projects on contemporary literature, and Marcus found himself paired with Connor Blake and a quiet girl named Amelia Chen. "Great," Connor muttered as they rearranged their desks into a group. "Stuck with the charity case." Amelia shot him a disapproving look but said nothing as she opened her notebook. "I was thinking we could analyze The Great Gatsby through the lens of social mobility and the American dream," she suggested, her voice soft but clear. "Boring," Connor replied, leaning back in his chair. "Let's do something easy." Marcus flipped through his copy of the novel, the margins already filled with his neat handwriting. "Actually, I think Amelia's idea has merit. The novel specifically critiques the myth that America is a meritocracy where anyone can succeed through hard work." Connor snorted. "Speaking from experience, scholarship?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Yes, actually. The novel shows how old money creates barriers to true social mobility, regardless of merit or effort. Gatsby acquires wealth but is never accepted by the established elite. It's a relevant critique of systems that pretend to be meritocratic while maintaining invisible barriers." Amelia's eyes widened with interest. "That's exactly what I was thinking. We could compare Gatsby's experience with modern examples of—" "Whatever," Connor interrupted. "You two nerds figure it out. Just put my name on it when you're done." He pulled out his phone and began scrolling, effectively removing himself from the discussion. Amelia and Marcus exchanged glances before continuing their planning. By the end of class, they had outlined a compelling analysis that explored how Fitzgerald's critique of the American dream remained relevant in contemporary society. As they gathered their things, Amelia hesitated. "Your annotations were really insightful," she said quietly. "I never considered the parallel between Gatsby's elaborate displays of wealth and modern social media posturing." "Thanks," Marcus replied, surprised by the genuine compliment. "It's interesting how literature from a century ago can still reflect current social dynamics." "Exactly!" Amelia's reserved demeanor momentarily gave way to enthusiasm. "Do you want to meet in the library tomorrow to work on the presentation?" Before Marcus could respond, Connor reappeared beside them. "What's this? The Asian nerd and the affirmative action special getting cozy?" He looked at Amelia. "Careful, Chen. Hanging out with the wrong crowd might hurt your perfect record." Amelia's face flushed, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I was just discussing the project," she muttered. "Sure you were," Connor smirked. "Let me know when you've finished my part." He sauntered away, high-fiving friends in the hallway. Marcus watched Amelia's shoulders slump slightly before she straightened them with visible effort. "Library at 10?" he asked, pretending the interruption hadn't happened. She hesitated, glancing toward Connor's retreating figure, then nodded quickly. "I'll be there," she said before hurrying away to her next class. That afternoon, as Marcus sat in the library finishing his calculus homework, he reflected on the interaction. Amelia's quick withdrawal after Connor's intervention told him all he needed to know about the social hierarchy at Oak Ridge. Even those who might be inclined to be friendly were constrained by invisible boundaries and the threat of social consequences. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his phone, a direct message on Instagram from an unfamiliar account. Opening it revealed a crudely photoshopped image of himself in stereotypical thug attire with the caption, "Scholarship in his natural habitat." The account was named Oak Ridge Realness and had already gained dozens of followers from the school. Marcus stared at the screen, his throat tightening. He wanted to believe he was above letting this affect him, but the truth was it stung. He quickly closed the app and shoved his phone into his backpack, trying to refocus on the equations before him, but the numbers swam on the page. For the first time since arriving at Oak Ridge, Marcus felt the weight of it all threatening to crush him. He could handle the direct confrontations, the snide remarks, even the occasional accident in the hallway. But this coordinated effort to humiliate him, to reduce him to a stereotype, it made the isolation feel suddenly overwhelming. He packed up his books and walked outside to wait for Dion. Leaning against the brick wall of the building, He closed his eyes and took deep breaths of the autumn air, now carrying a slight chill as the days grew shorter. The leaves of the massive oak trees that gave the school its name were beginning to turn, hints of gold and crimson appearing among the green. Tough day? Marcus opened his eyes to see Dr. Peterson approaching, his leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. Something like that, Marcus replied. Dr. Peterson nodded, his eyes understanding. You know, when I first started teaching here 15 years ago, I was the only black faculty member. Some parents actually requested their children be moved to different classes. He chuckled without humor. Now I'm department chair and those same parents brag about their kids being in my AP courses. Marcus studied the older man with new interest. How did you do it? Make them accept you? I didn't, Dr. Peterson said simply. I never made that my goal. My goal was to be so good at what I do that they couldn't ignore me, to create spaces within this institution where different voices could be heard. He paused. It's not about making them comfortable with your presence, Marcus. It's about making them uncomfortable with your absence. The rumble of an approaching car drew their attention. A slightly battered but well-maintained black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down to reveal Dion, his tie loosened after a long day at the community center, where he worked as a youth program coordinator. That's my brother, Marcus said. Dr. Peterson nodded. I look forward to reading your analysis of Reconstruction's economic policies on Monday. With a small smile, he headed toward the faculty parking lot. As Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, Dion took one look at his face and asked, "What happened?" Marcus considered brushing it off, saying it was nothing like he usually did to spare his brother additional worry. But something in him had shifted today. He pulled out his phone and showed Dion the Instagram post. Dion's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the account, which had already posted several more memes mocking Marcus. This is straight-up harassment, he said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. We should report this to the administration. Marcus took his phone back. They won't do anything. It'll just make it worse. Then I'll go talk to these kids myself, Dion said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. No, Marcus's response was immediate. That's exactly what they want. To provoke a reaction, to prove I don't belong there. Dion was quiet for a moment as he pulled away from the curb. So what's your plan? Just take it? Marcus looked out the window at the manicured grounds of Oak Ridge receding behind them. No, he said finally. I'm going to change the conversation. Have you ever been targeted online or felt isolated in a new environment? How did you respond? Did you walk away, fight back, or find another path forward? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might provide insight for others facing similar challenges. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp. Marcus sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment, the windows open to let in the fresh autumn air that carried the scent of Mrs. Gonzalez's cooking from the apartment below. The sounds of Westside waking up filtered in. Children playing in the courtyard, music from open windows, the occasional car horn. This was home, the three-bedroom apartment in the Cedar Grove housing complex that had seemed so spacious when they first moved in after his father died, and they could no longer afford their small house. Now with Marcus and Dion both grown, it was cramped but comfortable, filled with memories and the lingering presence of their father in the worn armchair that no one sat in, but everyone preserved. Their mother, Elaine Johnson, moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency despite her obvious exhaustion. She had worked a night shift at Mercy Hospital, yet here she was at 8 a.m. making breakfast before heading to bed. "For you need to rest, Ma," Marcus said, getting up to take the spatula from her hands. "I'm fine," she insisted, though she relinquished the spatula and sank into a chair. "Tell me about school. Is it everything you hoped?" Marcus focused on flipping the pancakes, considering his response. He had deliberately kept his descriptions of Oak Ridge vague all week, emphasizing the advanced classes and excellent facilities rather than the social dynamics. "It's challenging," he said finally, "but I'm handling it." Elaine studied her younger son's profile, her eyes missing nothing. Challenging in what way exactly? Before Marcus could formulate a suitably vague response, Dion entered the kitchen, already dressed for his Saturday youth basketball program. "The rich kids are being exactly what you'd expect rich kids to be," Dion said bluntly, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Entitled, prejudiced, and threatened by anyone who doesn't fit their narrow worldview." Elaine's face tightened. "Marcus, is this true?" Marcus shot his brother an annoyed look before setting a plate of pancakes on the table. It's not that simple, Ma. Yes, some of the students have been unwelcoming, but there are also good people there, like Mrs. Rivera in the cafeteria and Dr. Peterson, my history teacher. Unwelcoming, Dion scoffed. They created an Instagram account just to mock him. Elaine's eyes flashed with the fierce protectiveness that had gotten their family through the darkest days after their father's death. That's harassment. I'm calling the school on Monday. No, Marcus said firmly, sitting down across from her. Please, Ma, I need to handle this my way. By just taking it? She challenged, echoing Dion's words from the previous day. Marcus met her gaze steadily. By proving them wrong. Not just about me, but about where I come from. About us. He took a deep breath. Mrs. Rivera is on the Cultural Diversity Committee. They're planning a cultural fair next month, and I want to do a presentation about West Side. The real West Side, not the stereotype they have in their heads. Elaine was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her tea. Your father would say that's not your burden to bear, she said softly. He'd say you don't owe them an education about your humanity. I know, Marcus replied, the memory of his father's deep voice and unwavering principles washing over him. James Johnson had been a community organizer and advocate for West Side until his heart gave out 5 years ago. But Dad also believed in building bridges, in creating understanding. Remember what he always said? Change happens, one conversation at a time, Elaine finished with a sad smile. He was an optimist, your father. He was right, though, Marcus insisted. Those kids at Oak Ridge, they live in a bubble. They've never had to question their place in the world or think about what it means to be on the outside looking in. I can change that. Not for all of them, maybe, but for some. Elaine reached across the table and took his hand, her own calloused from years of care work. You have so much of him in you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Just remember that your worth isn't determined by their acceptance. You belong at that school because you earned it, not because they deigned to include you. Marcus squeezed her hand. I know, Ma. Trust me. After breakfast, while their mother slept, Marcus and Dion sat on the fire escape outside their bedroom window. The metal was cool beneath them, and the sounds of the neighborhood drifted up. A pickup basketball game in the courtyard, someone practicing saxophone in a nearby apartment, children laughing as they rode bikes along the sidewalk. You really think this cultural fair thing is going to make a difference? Dion asked, skepticism evident in his voice. Marcus watched a group of younger kids organizing a game of freeze tag below. I think it's a start, but I need your help. Whatever you need, little brother, Dion said without hesitation. I want to interview people from the neighborhood, get their stories, their perspectives, show what West Side really is, beyond the statistics and stereotypes. The community center would be perfect for that. Dion nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're not just trying to fit in there. You're trying to bring West Side to Oak Ridge. Exactly, Marcus said. And not just West Side, but all the communities that get oversimplified and dismissed. I've been talking with Amelia Chen. She's Chinese American and feels caught between cultures in a different way. And there are other students too who don't fit the Oak Ridge mold for various reasons. Dion was quiet for a moment, watching the neighborhood with new eyes. Dad would be proud of you, he said finally. Using that fancy school as a platform instead of just trying to blend in. Marcus smiled, the weight on his shoulders feeling a bit lighter. So you'll help? Of course, Dion replied. But on one condition. If those Instagram posts continue or if the harassment escalates, we involve the administration. Deal? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Deal. The weekend passed quickly, filled with planning and preparation. By Monday morning, Marcus had a clearer vision of his project and a renewed sense of purpose as he approached the imposing gates of Oak Ridge. The crisp morning air filled his lungs as he walked through the campus. The weight of stares and whispers still followed him, but they seemed to slide off him more easily now. He had a mission that extended beyond mere survival, and it straightened his spine and lifted his chin as he navigated the crowded hallways. If you're inspired by Marcus's determination to stay true to himself while seeking to create understanding, hit that subscribe button to follow more stories about the courage it takes to bridge divided worlds and the strength found in embracing your roots. History class was where everything changed. Dr. Peterson had assigned a group project on reconstruction, and Marcus found himself paired with Connor Blake, again, and a quiet boy named James Rodriguez, who seemed perpetually uncomfortable in his designer clothes. Today, Dr. Peterson announced. "You'll be working on your presentations about the social and economic impacts of Reconstruction on different groups in post-Civil War America. Remember, I want to see multiple perspectives represented." As they gathered in their assigned groups, Connor made no attempt to hide his annoyance. "Let me guess, Scholarship, you're going to lecture us about the poor oppressed freedmen." Marcus met his gaze calmly. "Actually, I was thinking we could take a more nuanced approach. Examine how Reconstruction affected black communities, yes, but also Southern whites of different economic classes, Northern business interests, and indigenous populations." James looked up, surprised. "That actually sounds interesting." Connor rolled his eyes. "Whatever. Just tell me what part you want me to present so I can get it over with." "You could cover the economic interests of Northern industrialists," Marcus suggested. "How they benefited from Reconstruction policies while simultaneously contributing to new forms of economic oppression. It's actually relevant to contemporary corporate influence in politics." Connor narrowed his eyes, suspicious of what seemed like an olive branch. "Fine. But don't expect me to turn this into some social justice sermon." "That's not what history is about," Marcus replied. "It's about understanding the complexity of human events, the interplay of different forces and perspectives, seeing the full picture, not just the parts that confirm what we already believe." James was watching this exchange with growing interest. "My family is from Cuba originally," he offered hesitantly. "My grandfather always talked about how American economic policies affected the island after the Spanish-American War. There might be parallels to Reconstruction's economic dynamics." Marcus nodded encouragingly. "That's exactly the kind of connection that makes history relevant. Let's incorporate that perspective too." They spent the rest of the class period outlining their presentation, with Marcus gently guiding the discussion, but making sure both Connor and James had equal input. By the end of the hour, they had developed a framework that was genuinely collaborative and intellectually substantial. As they packed up their materials, James lingered. "That was not what I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect?" Marcus asked. James shrugged uncomfortably. "I don't know. More conflict? A boring project? The usual Oak Ridge approach where we just regurgitate the textbook?" Marcus smiled. "History should never be boring. It's the story of us, all of us, not just the winners or the loudest voices." James seemed to want to say more, but Connor was waiting impatiently at the door. With a quick nod, James hurried to join him, leaving Marcus to ponder this small shift in the classroom dynamics. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully until lunch period arrived. Marcus was heading toward the kitchen to meet Mrs. Rivera when Amelia Chen approached him, her steps quick and determined despite the watchful eyes around them. "I can't meet in the library today," she said in a low voice. "Family commitment, but I've done some research for our English project." She slipped a USB drive into his hand. "It's all on here, my notes, some scholarly articles, and outline for our presentation." "Thanks," Marcus replied, surprised by her thoroughness. "I'll review it tonight and add my contributions." Amelia glanced around nervously. "I have to go, but—" She hesitated, then added quickly, "Your comment in class last week about literature reflecting social dynamics, it was really insightful. I've been thinking about it a lot." Before Marcus could respond, she hurried away, weaving through the crowded hallway with practiced ease. In the kitchen, Mrs. Rivera greeted him with a warm smile and a plate of the day's special, chicken enchiladas that smelled infinitely better than what was being served in the cafeteria line. "How's my favorite rebel doing today?" she asked as he sat at the small table in the corner. Marcus smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing in the warmth of the kitchen. "Planning a revolution, one group project at a time." Mrs. Rivera laughed. "That's how it starts." "So have you given any more thought to the cultural fair?" "Actually, yes," Marcus said, his enthusiasm building as he explained his idea. "I want to create an interactive exhibition about West Side. Photos, interviews, artifacts, music, to show the full picture of the community, not just the stereotypes. My brother Dion runs programs at the community center, and he's going to help me interview residents this weekend." Mrs. Rivera's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of project the committee is looking for. Something authentic and personal, not just the usual display of ethnic foods and traditional costumes." She leaned forward. "The committee meets tomorrow after school. You should come present your idea." Marcus hesitated. "Will they take me seriously? I'm just a new student." "They will, if I vouch for you. Mrs. Rivera said confidently. "And Dr. Peterson is on the committee too. He speaks very highly of you." As Marcus considered this opportunity, the kitchen door swung open, and a tall woman in an impeccably tailored suit entered. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her sharp eyes immediately landed on Marcus. "Mrs. Rivera," she said, her voice clipped and authoritative, "students are not permitted in the kitchen. It's a liability issue." Mrs. Rivera straightened. "Ms. Harrington, this is Marcus Johnson. He's been helping me with inventory during his lunch period." Ms. Harrington, the school principal, Marcus realized with a sinking feeling, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Is that so? I don't recall approving any student assistance for the cafeteria staff." Before Mrs. Rivera could respond, Marcus stood and extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Harrington. I've been grateful for Mrs. Rivera's mentorship as I adjust to Oak Ridge. She's been teaching me about the school's history and traditions." Ms. Harrington seemed taken aback by his composure and articulation, so at odds with whatever assumptions she had made upon seeing him. She briefly shook his hand. "I see. Well, in the future, please conduct your mentorship in appropriate spaces. The student lounge or library would be more suitable." Her tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. "Of course," Marcus replied evenly. "Thank you for your guidance." After Ms. Harrington left, Mrs. Rivera let out a low whistle. "Nicely handled. Victoria Harrington has been principal here for 20 years. She runs this place like her personal fiefdom. Is she going to give you trouble?" Marcus asked, concerned. Mrs. Rivera waved dismissively. "Nothing I can't handle. I've outlasted 3 principals already." She checked her watch. "You should get going if you want to make it to your next class on time." As Marcus gathered his things, she added, "Committee meeting. Tomorrow, 3:30 in the conference room. I'll put your name on the agenda." He nodded, a mix of anticipation and nervousness bubbling in his stomach. "I'll be there." That afternoon, as Marcus walked to the library for his regular study session, he noticed a commotion near the main office. A crowd of students had gathered, whispering and pointing at something on the wall. Curiosity drew him closer. It was a large poster for the cultural fair, but someone had defaced it with crude drawings and slurs targeting various ethnic groups. Standing before it, looking simultaneously angry and weary, was Ms. Harrington with several other faculty members, including Dr. Peterson. "This is unacceptable," Ms. Harrington was saying, her voice tight with controlled fury. "When we identify who did this, they will face severe consequences." Dr. Peterson noticed Marcus hovering at the edge of the crowd and motioned him over. "Mr. Johnson, what do you make of this?" Marcus studied the vandalized poster, his heart sinking at the hatred displayed so casually. "I think it proves why the cultural fair is necessary," he said quietly. "Fear and ignorance thrive in spaces where diversity is treated as a checkbox rather than a value." Ms. Harrington's sharp gaze turned to him, reassessing. "An interesting perspective, Mr. Johnson. Perhaps you would care to elaborate at tomorrow's committee meeting." "Dr. Peterson tells me you have some ideas for the fair." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I would be honored, Ms. Harrington." As the crowd dispersed and a janitor removed the defaced poster, Dr. Peterson placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the greatest opposition comes just when you're about to make real change. Remember that." The words stayed with Marcus for the rest of the day, through his classes and study period, all the way home as he watched the elegant stone buildings of Oak Ridge give way to the familiar brick apartments of West Side. Opposition meant fear, and fear meant that something important was at stake. For the first time since arriving at Oak Ridge, Marcus felt not just determined but hopeful. Change was possible. He had already seen small shifts in his interactions with James and Amelia, even Connor's grudging engagement in their project. Tomorrow, he would take the next step, not just surviving at Oak Ridge, but transforming it, one conversation at a time, just as his father had taught him. I know many of you watching have faced moments where you had to decide whether to retreat from hostility or push forward with your truth. If this resonates with your own journey, please subscribe to join our community of storytellers and truth seekers who believe in the power of authentic voices to create change. The cultural committee meeting was held in the oak-paneled conference room adjacent to the administrative offices. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his presentation materials carefully organized in a folder. His heart pounded as he took a seat at the long table, feeling acutely out of place among the framed photos of Oak Ridge's illustrious history, class pictures dating back decades, all showing the same homogeneous groups of privileged faces. Gradually, the room filled. Mrs. Rivera arrived with a reassuring smile, followed by Dr. Peterson and several other teachers Marcus recognized. There were also a few students, seniors who headed various cultural clubs, and finally, Ms. Harrington, who took her place at the head of the table with an air of efficient authority. "Let's begin," she said, consulting her agenda. "First item, the vandalism incident. Security is reviewing camera footage, and we expect to identify the responsible parties soon. Now moving on to the cultural fair planning. Mrs. Rivera, you requested time for a student presentation?" Mrs. Rivera nodded. "Yes. I'd like to introduce Marcus Johnson, a new student with an innovative proposal for the fair." All eyes turned to Marcus as he stood, his folder clutched perhaps a bit too tightly in his hands. He took a deep breath, remembering his father's advice from years ago when Marcus had been nervous about a school presentation. "Know your truth and speak it clearly. The rest will follow." "Thank you for allowing me to present today," he began, his voice finding its strength. "The cultural fair has traditionally focused on celebrating the diverse backgrounds of Oak Ridge students through displays of cultural artifacts, food, and performances. While valuable, this approach can sometimes unintentionally reduce rich, complex cultures to superficial symbols." He paused, gauging the room's reaction. Most faces showed interest, though a few seemed skeptical. "I'm proposing a different approach, one that goes beyond celebrating diversity to fostering genuine understanding and connection. My project, titled Unseen Communities, would create an interactive exhibition about West Side, the neighborhood I come from, and potentially other communities represented at Oak Ridge, but rarely truly seen or understood." Marcus distributed handouts showing his concept, interview stations where visitors could listen to residents' stories, a historical timeline of the neighborhood showing its evolution and challenges, a map highlighting community resources and strengths, and a photo exhibition capturing daily life beyond the stereotypes. The goal isn't to present a sanitized version of West Side, but an authentic one, acknowledging challenges while highlighting resilience, community bonds, and cultural wealth that statistics and stereotypes miss. I've already secured support from the West Side Community Center, where my brother works, to conduct interviews and collect materials. Ms. Harrington studied the proposal with an unreadable expression. "This is certainly different from our usual approach," she said carefully. "What prompted this idea, Mr. Johnson?" Marcus considered his response, weighing honesty against diplomacy. "My experience at Oak Ridge has shown me that there's a significant gap in understanding between communities that exist side by side but rarely truly interact. Misconceptions and stereotypes fill that gap, creating barriers that feel insurmountable." He didn't mention the Instagram account, the taunts, or the daily small humiliations. He didn't need to. The vandalized poster from yesterday had made the point for him. "Your proposal focuses on West Side," noted one of the teachers. "How does this relate to the broader theme of cultural diversity?" "The methodology could be expanded," Marcus explained. "Other students could create similar exhibitions about their communities, not just ethnic or national cultures, but any community that faces misunderstanding or marginalization. The format creates space for authentic voice and agency, rather than having their experiences interpreted or simplified by others." Dr. Peterson nodded approvingly. "It shifts the paradigm from observing difference to engaging with lived experience. There's significant educational value in that approach." Discussion continued for nearly 30 minutes, with Marcus answering questions and addressing concerns. Some committee members worried about space constraints, others about potentially controversial content, but Mrs. Rivera and Dr. Peterson consistently supported the proposal, emphasizing its educational merit and alignment with the school's stated values of inclusion and critical thinking. Finally, Ms. Harrington called for a vote, all in favor of approving Mr. Johnson's Unseen Communities project as part of this year's cultural fair. Hands rose around the table, not unanimously, but a clear majority. Marcus felt a surge of emotion as Ms. Harrington officially recorded the approval. "Congratulations, Mr. Johnson," she said, with what might have been a hint of respect in her voice. "You'll be assigned space in the main hall. and Mrs. Rivera will serve as your faculty advisor. I expect regular progress reports and a preview of all materials before the fair opens." "Thank you," Marcus said, gathering his materials with slightly trembling hands. "I won't disappoint you." As the meeting moved on to other agenda items, Marcus caught Mrs. Rivera's eye. She gave him a subtle thumbs up and a proud smile that warmed him from the inside. He left the meeting with a lightness in his step that had been absent since his arrival at Oak Ridge. For the first time, he had carved out a small space that was truly his, a platform from which to speak his truth, rather than simply absorbing the narratives others imposed on him. In the hallway, he found Amelia waiting, her expression a mix of anxiety and determination. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "They approved it," Marcus replied, still somewhat amazed by this fact. Relief washed over Amelia's face. "Good, because I'd like to help. If you're open to expanding the project, I have ideas about exploring the Chinese-American experience, the expectations, the pressure, the cultural gaps between generations." Marcus studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes, the slight defensive hunch of her shoulders, signs he recognized from his own experience of bracing against judgment. "I'd welcome your contribution," he said sincerely. "The more voices, the more powerful the impact." Amelia's posture relaxed slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said in English class, about literature reflecting social dynamics. It made me realize I've never really seen my experience reflected anywhere at Oak Ridge. Not in the curriculum, not in the social hierarchy, not even in the cultural events that are supposed to be inclusive." "Then let's change that," Marcus said, his vision for the project expanding in real time. Together. As they walked toward the library to discuss their ideas, neither noticed Connor Blake watching from around the corner, his expression unreadable as he observed this unexpected alliance. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marcus divided his time between schoolwork, developing the exhibition, and navigating the increasingly complex social dynamics at Oak Ridge. Word of his project had spread, generating reactions ranging from genuine interest to outright hostility. The Oak Ridge Realness Instagram account had escalated its attacks, posting manipulated photos of Marcus and now Amelia as well, mocking their collaboration with crude stereotypes. But alongside this ugliness, something else was emerging. A small but growing group of students who were inspired by their courage to tell their own stories. James Rodriguez had approached Marcus after history class one day, speaking in a hurried whisper. "My parents don't know I'm Cuban," he'd confessed. "My grandfather changed our name when he immigrated. They've spent my whole life pretending we're just generic white Americans with good tans." His eyes had held a mixture of shame and defiance. "I want to interview my grandfather for your project. He's never really told his story, and I think it's time." Similar conversations followed. Zainab Mirza, a quiet junior who wore a hijab and kept to herself, offered to share her experiences navigating Islamophobia in post-9/11 America. Dakota Wilson, whose Cherokee heritage was invisible beneath his Oak Ridge uniform but central to his identity, wanted to explore indigenous perspectives on American history that were absent from the curriculum. What had begun as Marcus's personal mission was evolving into something larger, a movement of voices long silenced or diminished in Oak Ridge's carefully curated environment. But with this growing visibility came growing resistance. Connor and his circle of friends had shifted from mere taunts to more organized opposition. They'd formed a countergroup called Tradition Matters, ostensibly focused on preserving Oak Ridge's heritage and values, but thinly veiling their resistance to change. They'd even secured faculty support from Mr. Whitman, the aging economics teacher known for his conservative views. Do you remember a time when speaking your truth inspired others to find their voices too? Or when standing up for what you believe in faced organized resistance? Share your experience in the comments below. The ripple effects of your courage might surprise you. On a crisp Friday afternoon, 3 weeks into the project, Marcus was interviewing Mr. Gonzalez, an elderly resident of Westside who had lived in the neighborhood for over 60 years. They sat in the community center's small recording studio, where Dayon had arranged for them to use professional equipment for the oral histories. Mr. Gonzalez's weathered hands gestured expressively as he described how the neighborhood had changed over the decades. People look at Westside now and see only what's missing: the closed factories, the underfunded schools, the struggles. They don't see what remains, how we take care of each other, how we build community despite limited resources, how we preserve culture and dignity when the system would rather write us off. Marcus nodded, thinking of how perfectly this captured what he hoped to convey through the exhibition. What would you want people from outside Westside to understand about this community? Mr. Gonzalez considered the question, his eyes distant with memory. That poverty isn't a character flaw. That communities like ours are resilient, not because we enjoy suffering, but because we've had to be. And that behind every statistic is a human story full of joy, pain, love, and dignity, just like anybody else's. The interview continued for another hour, with Mr. Gonzalez sharing stories of community organizing, mutual aid networks, cultural celebrations, and the informal support systems that had sustained Westside through decades of economic disinvestment and institutional neglect. As they wrapped up, Dayon entered the studio. "How'd it go?" "Beautifully," Marcus replied, carefully storing the audio files on his laptop. "Mr. Gonzalez just gave us the heart of the entire exhibition." After thanking the elderly man and watching him leave with his daughter, Marcus turned to Dayon. "I don't know how to thank you for all this. The equipment, the connections, everything." Dayon shrugged, but his eyes showed pride. "That's what family does. Besides, this project matters beyond just your experience at that fancy school. These stories deserve to be heard." Marcus nodded, gathering his materials. "I should head back to Oak Ridge. We're meeting in the library to organize all the interviews and decide on the exhibition layout." "I'll drive you," Dayon offered. "Actually, I was thinking I might stick around for a bit, check out this library I've heard so much about. Maybe offer some help with the technical aspects of your exhibition." Marcus looked up, surprised. "You want to come to Oak Ridge?" "Why not?" Dayon replied with a casual shrug that didn't quite hide his intentionality. "Seems like you could use an extra pair of hands. And maybe it's time the Oak Ridge bubble met more of the Johnson family." Marcus understood what his brother was really offering. Not just practical help, but visible solidarity. A physical reminder that Marcus didn't stand alone. The thought of Dayon's confident presence in Oak Ridge's hallowed halls brought a smile to his face. "I'd like that," he said simply. They arrived at Oak Ridge as afternoon shadows lengthened across the campus. The library, a grand two-story building with floor-to-ceiling windows and rows of mahogany bookshelves, was quiet except for the small group gathered at a large table near the back. Amelia, James, Zainab, and Dakota were already there, surrounded by laptops, notes, and design sketches. "Everyone, this is my brother Dayon," Marcus introduced as they approached. "He runs youth programs at the Westside Community Center and has been helping with the technical aspects of our interviews." Dayon's presence initially created a ripple of uncertainty among the group. Not because of hostility, but because he represented something entirely outside their experience. At 25, with his confident posture and observant gaze, Dayon carried himself with an assurance that came from navigating multiple worlds successfully. His business casual attire, pressed slacks and a buttoned shirt with rolled sleeves revealing tattooed forearms, was a deliberate choice, Marcus knew, neither conforming to Oak Ridge's formal expectations nor playing into stereotypes. The awkwardness dissipated quickly as Dayon engaged with genuine interest in their project, offering technical suggestions for the audio installations and asking thoughtful questions about their design concepts. Within half an hour, he was helping James troubleshoot audio editing software and discussing with Zainab how to create more immersive listening stations. Their collaborative work was interrupted by the arrival of Connor Blake, flanked by two of his usual companions. They stopped short at the sight of Dayon, momentary confusion crossing their faces before Connor's expression settled into calculated disdain. "Well, looks like they're letting anyone in here these days," he remarked loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "Better make sure your laptops are secured." The library fell silent, all eyes turning to their table. Marcus felt heat rise in his face, but before he could respond, Dayon stood smoothly, extending his hand toward Connor with a pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dayon Johnson, Marcus's brother and youth program director at Westside Community Center. And you are." Connor hesitated, thrown off balance by this direct professional approach. Reluctantly, he shook Dayon's hand. "Connor Blake." "Ah, Blake," Dayon said, recognition dawning in his voice. "Blake Construction, right? Your father's company just won the bid for the new recreational center in Westside. Small world." He maintained eye contact with Connor, his smile unwavering, but his meaning clear. Their worlds were more connected than Connor might want to acknowledge. Connor withdrew his hand, visibly discomfited by this unexpected connection and the reversal of power it represented. Whatever, just keep it down. Some of us are trying to study. He retreated to a table across the library, his friends following with backward glances. When they were gone, Dakota let out a low whistle. That was impressive. Dion shrugged, sitting back down. Information is power. Knowing how communities connect, even when they think they don't, that's how you build bridges. Or, he added with a slight smile, how you make sure people think twice before burning them. The group returned to their work with renewed energy, the brief confrontation somehow cementing their sense of shared purpose. By the time the library was closing, they had a comprehensive plan for the exhibition layout, a cataloging system for all their interviews and materials, and a clear division of responsibilities for the final assembly. As they packed up their materials, Ms. Chen, Amelia's mother, arrived to pick her up. A petite woman with an elegant bearing and sharp, assessing eyes, she surveyed the group with barely concealed surprise and concern. "Amelia, you're late," she said in accented English, her gaze lingering on Dion and Marcus. "Sorry, Mum. We were finalizing our cultural fair project," Amelia replied, her voice taking on a formal quality Marcus hadn't heard before. "This is Marcus Johnson and his brother Dion. They've been instrumental in developing our exhibition concept." Ms. Chen nodded stiffly. "I see. And this exhibition is for a class." "It's for the school's cultural fair," Amelia explained. "We're creating an interactive installation about underrepresented communities and perspectives." Something complicated passed across Ms. Chen's face, concern mixed with a hint of recognition. "Your father and I came to this country so you could have opportunities, Amelia. Focus on your studies, not extracurriculars." The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Amelia's expression closed off. "This is important, Mum. It's about voices like ours being heard." Ms. Chen glanced at her watch. "We'll discuss this at home. Your father is waiting with dinner." After they left, an awkward silence fell over the remaining group. Finally, James spoke, his voice quiet. "That's why I haven't told my parents about this project. They've spent their lives trying to assimilate, to not rock the boat. This would feel like betrayal to them." Zainab nodded in understanding. "My parents are supportive but terrified. Every time I draw attention to being Muslim, they see it as putting a target on my back." "The fear is real," Dion acknowledged. "When systems are designed to reward conformity and punish difference, speaking up comes with risks. But staying silent has costs too, to your spirit, your sense of self." Dakota gathered his things, a determined set to his jaw. "My grandmother says that stories are how we survive. When we stop telling our stories, we stop existing as ourselves. I'm tired of not existing at Oak Ridge." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Marcus felt a profound sense of connection with these peers who were becoming friends, united not by superficial interests or social status, but by shared experiences of navigating between worlds, of carrying histories often rendered invisible. The exhibition was no longer just his project, but a collective assertion of presence and voice. In the car heading home, Dion was unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful as he navigated the transition from Oak Ridge's manicured surroundings to the familiar streets of Westside. "Your friends are good people," he said finally, caught between worlds in different ways, but fighting to claim their whole selves. That takes courage. Marcus nodded, watching the neighborhood come into view. The brick apartment buildings with laundry strung between windows, children playing under streetlights, elderly neighbors sitting on stoops, music and cooking smells creating a sensory landscape so different from Oak Ridge's sterile perfection. "We're going to change things," he said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not for everyone, but for some, and maybe that's enough to start." Dion glanced at his younger brother, pride evident in his eyes. "Dad would say it's more than enough, it's everything. If this journey of finding allies and building community in unexpected places speaks to you, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We're building our own community here of people who understand that the most powerful stories are often those that go untold until someone brave enough decides to speak." The Tuesday before the cultural fair, everything fell apart. Marcus arrived at school to find the exhibition space in disarray, display boards knocked over, audio equipment damaged, and water deliberately poured over their laptops. On the main wall, someone had spray-painted "Tradition matters" in large red letters. Mrs. Rivera stood in the center of the destruction, her face ashen as she made notes of the damage. Dr. Peterson was speaking with campus security, while Ms. Harrington surveyed the scene with tightly controlled fury. "Marcus," Mrs. Rivera called when she saw him frozen in the doorway. "I'm so sorry. Security found it like this morning." Marcus moved through the space as if in a dream, picking up sodden photographs and ruined interview transcripts. Months of work, dozens of personal stories, countless hours of editing and design, all deliberately destroyed. "The laptops are completely ruined," Dr. Peterson said, joining them, "and it appears the backup hard drive is missing." Marcus thought of Mr. Gonzalez's interview, of Zainab's powerful spoken word pieces, of James's emotional conversation with his grandfather, all potentially lost. His hands began to shake, and he clenched them into fists to stop the trembling. "Who would do this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Ms. Harrington's voice was ice. "We have security footage. The perpetrators wore masks, but we will identify them. This goes beyond mere vandalism. This is targeted destruction of academic work and expensive equipment. There will be serious consequences." The others began arriving. Amelia first, her hand flying to her mouth at the sight, then James, Dakota, and Zainab, each registering the destruction with expressions ranging from shock to resigned anger. "The fair is in 3 days, Amelia said, her voice hollow. "We can't possibly recreate everything in time." "Then we don't," Marcus said, an idea forming even as grief and rage warred within him. "We document this instead. Make the destruction part of the exhibition." The others looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" James asked. "This," Marcus gestured around the room, "is the clearest illustration of what we've been trying to say all along, that voices from the margins are seen as a threat, that there are forces actively working to silence certain stories and perspectives. So we show exactly what happened here. We create a new exhibition about the silencing itself." Dr. Peterson nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "A meta-exhibition about whose stories are seen as valuable and whose are deemed threatening enough to destroy." "Exactly," Marcus said, energy returning to his voice. "We salvage what we can, photograph the damage, create a timeline of the project and its destruction, and analyze what it means that someone felt so threatened by our stories that they resorted to this." Mrs. Rivera smiled, pride evident in her eyes. "Turning their attempt to silence you into an even more powerful statement. James Sr. would have loved this approach." Marcus felt a pang at the mention of his father, whose strategies for community organizing had often involved creative responses to opposition. He would have said that how we respond to attempts to silence us says more about who we are than any story we could tell directly. Ms. Harrington, who had been listening with a thoughtful expression, cleared her throat. "I believe we can provide additional space and emergency funding to support this revised exhibition. And I will personally ensure that those responsible face appropriate consequences." As plans formed for the new approach, the door burst open and Connor Blake strode in, his face flushed with what appeared to be genuine alarm. "I had nothing to do with this," he said immediately, surveying the damage. "This wasn't Tradition Matters. We oppose your message, yes, but we wouldn't destroy property or sabotage academic work." Marcus studied Connor's face, searching for signs of deception but finding what appeared to be authentic distress. "Then who did?" Amelia challenged, skepticism evident in her voice. Connor ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know for certain, but there's a group of seniors who thought our approach was too soft. They've been talking about more direct action to protect Oak Ridge values. I told them they were being idiots, but..." He gestured at the destruction. "I never thought they'd go this far." "Do you have names?" Ms. Harrington asked sharply. Connor hesitated, conflicting loyalties evident in his expression. "I can't. I don't have proof." "Then your concern is noted but ultimately unhelpful, Mr. Blake," Ms. Harrington replied coolly. "If you truly oppose these actions, perhaps consider what your silence protects." As Connor left, clearly unsettled by the rebuke, Marcus found himself re-evaluating the other boy. Connor's values and perspectives remained problematic, but there appeared to be lines he wouldn't cross, a complexity Marcus hadn't previously allowed for. The next 3 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. News of the vandalism spread throughout the school, creating unexpected ripples of support. Students Marcus had never spoken to offered help with rebuilding displays. Teachers opened their classrooms for after-hours work sessions. Even local media picked up the story, with a reporter from the community newspaper interviewing the group about what had happened. The destroyed equipment posed the biggest challenge until an unexpected solution emerged. Dion arrived Wednesday afternoon with representatives from Blake Construction, Connor's father among them, carrying new laptops, audio equipment, and professional-grade display materials. "We heard about what happened," Mr. Blake said gruffly, avoiding direct eye contact. "Our company believes in community responsibility. The actions of a few individuals don't represent Oak Ridge values, and we wanted to make that clear with tangible support." The unspoken subtext was evident to everyone. Damage control, both for the Blake family reputation and for Oak Ridge itself. But the resources were real and desperately needed, so Marcus accepted with diplomatic grace. "Thank you, Mr. Blake. Your support will help ensure these important stories can still be shared." As the adults coordinated the setup of the new equipment, Marcus noticed Connor hovering uncertainly at the edge of the activity. After a moment's hesitation, he approached his classmate. "Did you have something to do with this?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the donation. Connor shrugged, uncomfortable with the direct question. "My dad was going on about how this incident could affect our company's image, especially with the West Side contract. I just suggested this might be a way to demonstrate corporate community values." Marcus suppressed a smile at Connor's transparent attempt to frame this as strategic rather than compassionate. "Well, whatever the motivation, it helps. Thanks." Connor studied him for a moment. "Why aren't you more angry? If someone destroyed something I'd worked on for months, I'd be out for blood." Marcus considered the question seriously. "I am angry, but anger alone doesn't change anything. My father used to say that how you channel your response to injustice determines whether you just experience it or transform it." "Your father sounds like some kind of philosopher," Connor said, half mocking but with a hint of genuine curiosity. "He was a community organizer in Westside," Marcus replied. "He believed in building bridges where others saw only walls. He died 5 years ago. Heart attack at 42. Too much stress. Too little healthcare access." Connor's expression shifted. The reality of Marcus's life outside Oak Ridge suddenly more concrete. "I'm sorry about your dad," he said, and seemed to mean it. An awkward silence followed, neither boy quite sure how to navigate this tentative moment of connection across their many differences. "Anyway," Connor said finally, "good luck with the exhibition. I still think your whole premise is unnecessarily divisive, but," he gestured toward the destruction, "this isn't how disagreements should be handled." As Connor walked away to join his father, Marcus reflected on how opposition wasn't always monolithic, how within systems of privilege and exclusion there were still gradations of response, still potential spaces for dialogue and evolution, however limited. By Friday morning, the transformed exhibition was ready. What had begun as Unseen Communities was now titled Silenced Voices, Rising Stories, and featured both salvaged elements of the original concept and a powerful documentation of the vandalism itself. Visitors would walk through the destruction first, experiencing the literal attempt to silence marginalized voices before entering a space of rebuilding and resilience where the stories themselves were shared. The fair opened at noon, and the response exceeded all expectations. Students, faculty, parents, and community members moved through the exhibition with expressions ranging from discomfort to profound emotion. The local media returned, this time with television cameras, interviewing Marcus and the team about the experience and their decision to transform destruction into educational opportunity. Ms. Harrington had announced that morning that 3 senior students had been identified as the vandals through security footage and had been suspended pending further disciplinary action. The news had sent a clear message throughout the school that such behavior would not be tolerated, regardless of the students' family connections or status. By mid-afternoon, the exhibition space was crowded with visitors. Marcus observed from a quiet corner, emotionally exhausted but deeply satisfied, as he watched people engage with the stories and perspectives that had nearly been silenced. Dr. Peterson joined him, offering a bottle of water and a moment of companionable silence before speaking. "You've created something remarkable here," he said, "something that will leave a lasting impact on Oak Ridge long after the fair ends." Marcus nodded, watching as Elaine Johnson, who had taken a rare day off work to attend, listened intently to an audio recording of Mr. Gonzalez's interview, her eyes bright with unshed tears at this public honoring of a community so often dismissed or denigrated. "It's not just my creation," Marcus replied. "It belongs to all of us who contributed, and to the community whose stories we're sharing." Dr. Peterson smiled. "That understanding, that true leadership is about amplifying voices rather than centering your own. That's rare, especially at your age." He paused, watching a group of younger students engage animatedly with one of the interactive displays. "We've just received funding for a new cultural studies program starting next year. We'll need student representatives on the curriculum committee. I'd like you to consider applying." The offer represented something Marcus hadn't dared hope for, not just temporary visibility through a single exhibition, but a structural opportunity to influence how stories and perspectives were incorporated into Oak Ridge's educational approach long-term. "I'd be honored," he said simply. As Dr. Peterson moved on to speak with other visitors, Marcus continued his quiet observation of the exhibition's impact. He noticed James bringing his parents through, the older couple's initial discomfort giving way to emotional engagement as they listened to the recording of James's grandfather describing his journey from Cuba. He saw Amelia and her mother in intense conversation before a display featuring intergenerational perspectives from Chinese-American families, Ms. Chen's expression softening as she recognized elements of her own experience reflected with dignity rather than reduction. Even Connor moved through the exhibition with his father, their expressions serious as they engaged with content that challenged their assumptions and privileges. When they reached the section documenting the vandalism and subsequent community response, Mr. Blake stopped, visibly affected by the stark visual evidence of attempts to silence these stories, juxtaposed with the outpouring of support that followed. Dayon appeared at Marcus's side, handing him a cup of punch from the refreshment table. "Quite an impact you're making here, little brother," he said with quiet pride. Marcus took a sip, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. "We're making," he corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, without Mom, without everyone who contributed their stories and support." Dayon draped an arm around his shoulders. "Dad would be so proud, not just of what you've created, but of how you've created it, with dignity, resilience, and bridge building, even in the face of resistance." Marcus leaned slightly into his brother's solid presence, allowing himself to feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished together. Beyond the exhibition itself, beyond even the relationships formed through the process, they had created a moment of genuine community transformation, a space where stories long silenced were finally being heard and valued. As the day continued, more visitors flowed through, including residents from Westside who had contributed their stories and were now seeing them presented with respect and prominence in an institution that had long seemed inaccessible and unwelcoming. The boundaries between Oak Ridge and the surrounding communities felt momentarily more permeable, more crossable. It wasn't a complete revolution. Marcus harbored no illusions that a single exhibition would dismantle entrenched systems of privilege and exclusion. But it was a beginning, a visible crack in the wall, a demonstration of what was possible when marginalized voices refused to be silenced and instead transformed opposition into opportunity for deeper understanding. Standing there in the heart of Oak Ridge, watching the ripples of change spreading outward, Marcus felt a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with acceptance by others and everything to do with the certainty of his own purpose and voice. He belonged here not because Oak Ridge had deigned to include him, but because he had claimed his space and used it to create room for others. As you reflect on Marcus's journey from isolation to impact, I hope it resonates with your own experiences of finding your voice in spaces that weren't designed for you. If this story has touched you, please take a moment to subscribe and join our community of storytellers and changemakers who believe in the power of authentic voices to transform our world. In the weeks following the cultural fair, Oak Ridge Academy experienced subtle but significant shifts. The exhibition had sparked conversations in classrooms and faculty meetings about curriculum representation, community engagement, and the school's responsibility to prepare students for an increasingly diverse world. Marcus found himself navigating a new reality, not one of complete acceptance or transformed attitudes, but of increased visibility and grudging respect. The harassment had largely ceased, though Connor's Tradition Matters group continued to advocate for what they called balanced perspectives in school policies and curriculum. The most meaningful changes were perhaps the quietest ones. James had begun speaking Spanish occasionally with his parents, reclaiming a part of his heritage they had long suppressed out of fear and assimilation pressure. Zainab had started a Muslim student association with administrative support, creating space for prayer and community that had previously been absent from campus. Dakota was working with Dr. Peterson to incorporate indigenous perspectives into the history curriculum through guest speakers and supplementary materials. And Amelia, brilliant, cautious Amelia, had found her voice not just in academic excellence but in advocacy, writing a powerful series for the school newspaper about the psychological impact of being caught between cultures and the strength found in embracing one's full identity. On a crisp morning in late October, as the leaves of the oak trees blazed in their full autumn glory, Marcus sat on a bench in the courtyard reviewing notes for an upcoming debate competition. The campus was quieter than usual, with many students away for a long weekend. "Is this seat taken?" a voice asked. Marcus looked up to see Ms. Harrington standing before him, her usual formal attire replaced by a more casual sweater and slacks. "Not at all," he said, shifting to make room. She sat, her posture still carrying the dignity of her position, but somehow less rigid than usual. For a moment, they shared a comfortable silence, watching golden leaves drift down from the ancient oaks. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Johnson," she said finally. Marcus looked at her in surprise. "For what, Ms. Harrington? When you first arrived at Oak Ridge, I saw you primarily as a statistic, a diversity metric, if I'm being brutally honest. Another tick mark in our inclusion report." She met his gaze directly, her usual administrative mask set aside. "I didn't see you. Your intelligence, your character, your potential to transform this community." Marcus absorbed this unexpected candor, unsure how to respond. "I've been principal here for 20 years, she continued. "I've overseen countless initiatives aimed at diversity and inclusion, attended workshops, hired consultants. But it took watching what happened with your exhibition, both the attempt to silence it and the community response that followed, to make me truly understand the difference between inclusion as policy and inclusion as practice." "Thank you for sharing that," Marcus said carefully. "But I think the real test isn't in recognition, but in structural change. Will Oak Ridge be different for the next student who doesn't fit the traditional mold?" Ms. Harrington nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Directness, another quality I failed to fully appreciate initially." She handed him a folder. "This is a proposal being presented to the board next week. A comprehensive review of our admissions policies, financial aid allocation, curriculum development, and community engagement strategies. Dr. Peterson and I have been working on it for the past month, informed significantly by what we learned from your project." Marcus scanned the document, noting ambitious goals for increased socio-economic diversity, curriculum transformation, and sustained partnerships with communities like Westside. "This is substantial. It's just a beginning," Ms. Harrington acknowledged. "Real change takes time and consistent effort, but I wanted you to know that your presence here, your courage and persistence in the face of resistance, has catalyzed something important." As she stood to leave, she added, "The Cultural Studies Committee will be meeting next Tuesday after school. As our newest student representative, your input will be valuable." After she left, Marcus sat for a long time, turning this interaction over in his mind. There was something profoundly validating in having his impact acknowledged by the person who represented institutional authority at Oak Ridge. Yet he also recognized the limitations of individual acknowledgement without sustained structural change. His phone buzzed with a text from Dion. "Community Center Board approved your proposal for the student mentorship program. Ready to build that bridge from both directions?" Marcus smiled, remembering their conversations about creating pathways for Oak Ridge students to engage with Westside beyond superficial service projects, to form relationships, share resources, and learn from the community's strengths rather than just focusing on its challenges. A bridge from both directions. That was the vision taking shape. Not just bringing Westside stories to Oak Ridge, but bringing Oak Ridge's resources and opportunities to Westside, creating flow and exchange rather than one-way charity or inclusion. As he gathered his things to head to his next class, Marcus noticed a small group of freshmen watching him with barely concealed curiosity. Word of the exhibition and its impact had transformed him in the eyes of younger students into something of a campus legend, a role he found both amusing and uncomfortable. One of the younger students, a girl with curly hair and determined eyes, approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Johnson?" He nodded, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Sophia. I'm from East Side Heights," she said, naming another predominantly working-class neighborhood. "I just started here on scholarship and she faltered momentarily. "I saw your exhibition last week. It made me feel like maybe I could belong here too, without having to pretend to be someone I'm not." The simple statement hit Marcus with unexpected force. This moment of recognition and possibility for someone walking a similar path, this was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all his efforts. "You absolutely belong here," he said with conviction. "And not despite where you come from, but with all of who you are." Relief washed over her face and she nodded quickly before rejoining her friends. Marcus watched them go, struck by the realization that change often happened in these small human moments of connection and recognition, as much as in policy documents and institutional reforms. As he walked through the campus toward his history class, Marcus reflected on the journey of the past month. He had arrived at Oak Ridge feeling like an outsider, carrying the weight of representation and the burden of proving his worth. He had faced resistance, humiliation, and outright hostility, but he had also found unexpected allies, built meaningful connections, and discovered a power in his voice that transcended mere acceptance or inclusion. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and possibility as Marcus entered the classroom where it had all begun. Dr. Peterson nodded in greeting as Marcus took his seat, no longer isolated in the front row, but part of a reconfigured seating arrangement designed to facilitate dialogue across different perspectives. James and Amelia were already there, engaged in animated conversation about their joint research project on comparative immigrant experiences. Connor sat nearby, still carrying his privileged confidence, but with hints of a new thoughtfulness in his engagement with different viewpoints. As class began, Dr. Peterson posed a complex question about historical narrative and power. Who gets to tell the story of a nation? Whose perspectives are centered? Who's marginalized? And why it matters? Marcus raised his hand, no longer hesitant to claim space in the discussion, no longer questioning whether his voice belonged in this room. "History isn't just about what happened," he began, "but about whose experiences we validate as worthy of remembering, whose suffering we acknowledge, whose contributions we recognize. When we expand the narrative to include voices from the margins, we don't diminish the story. We make it more complete, more honest, more fully human." Dr. Peterson nodded approvingly as discussion flowed around the room, perspectives building upon and challenging each other in the messy, vital process of collective learning. Marcus participated fully, but also listened intently, recognizing that his own voice mattered most when in conversation with others, not in isolation. This was the change he had helped create, not a perfect transformation, not an end to all exclusion or prejudice, but a widening of possibility, an opening of space where different voices could be heard and valued, where bridges could be built across divides that once seemed fixed and immutable. As sunshine streamed through the classroom windows, illuminating faces engaged in passionate discourse, Marcus felt a deep sense of belonging, not to Oak Ridge as an institution, but to this evolving community of learners grappling honestly with difficult questions, to this moment of potential transformation, to this ongoing journey toward more inclusive understanding. It was enough. It was everything. It was just the beginning. If this story of transformation and bridge building has touched something in you, please click on the video appearing on your screen now for an even more powerful journey of courage that will inspire you to find your own voice and create change in your community. Your story matters too, and it deserves to be heard, and it